Hi everyone, I think you can all hear me, and welcome to our lunch lecture with Margot Wallastrom, the Swedish Minister of Foreign Affairs. I am Matilda, and I'm one of the heads of the lecture committee for Utrikespolitiska Föreningen Göteborg, the Society of International Affairs in Gothenburg. After me follows Ann-Sofie Hermansson, the chair of the City Executive Board here in Gothenburg, who will present the minister, Margot Wallastrom. The minister will then hold a lecture, and after that there will be time for questions, where me and my co-worker Elsa will hand out microphones and to the ones who want to ask something. So without further ado, welcome up Ann-Sofie Hermansson.
So, thank you. Today is a very special day, as you all know. To me, the International Women's Day has always been about a lot more than just delivering an inspiring event. It has always been an important checkpoint. Where do we stand in the fight for gender equality? Which are the most urgent problems to solve? In what direction should we be moving from here on? This year, the need for bringing things together very clearly comes to my mind. Gender equality activities have in recent years become a little bit too scattered. We need to get a better focus. We need to concentrate on reforms that really makes a difference on the ground. We need to scale down short-term projects and scale up the permanent workflows. And luckily, there are good things waiting in the pipeline. Because at the local and national level, I believe that the Gender Equality Agency, which will next year will be established here in Gothenburg, will become a very useful tool for bringing things together. It will become a strong force in national policy formation. At last, work on all gender-related issues like wages, work conditions, domestic violence, discrimination, and so on, can be combined and coordinated in a really efficient way. The agency will also be a fantastic stimulus for all the ambitious work that is being carried out by so many actors around this city. And at the international level, I think that you, Margot, are doing an excellent job in bringing things together. In a clear and very enlightening way, you are putting modern-day feminism at the heart of security and foreign policy. Given Sweden's new role in UN Security Council, the impact of this feminist agenda will get stronger and stronger by the day. I'm not sure that we will be able to go all the way from despair to hope, but we will definitely be heading in the right direction. So, at this very special day, it is an honor and indeed a pleasure to have you here in Gothenburg. Please, Margot, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let's see if this works. I think so. Thank you so much for coming. It's an honor. And in those days when attention is, as somebody has said, the most rare and precious of all human generosity, the fact that you are coming to listen to me, I take to heart, and thank you for being here. I also read this morning an article about the fact that social media actually has, the use of social media has gone so far as making some people even check Twitter or what have you while in bed with their partner. So you are excused if you want to use social media, but of course it's nice when people listen. And I think there was another lecture from that article this morning. Something happens in the meeting between people. Something happens in the way you can interpret the expression in somebody's face or understand exactly what is the impact of what you're saying. Never underestimate the personal meeting between people. I can tell you that for more than 2 years, I had a job that really left me with a heavier heart, but paradoxically also with more hope for the future. And that was working on the topic of conflict-related sexual violence. And I remember in particular a meeting with a young girl. She could have been 15, in the DRC, in the Congo. And I came to something that is called the salle d'écoute. So it means a place where victims of sexual violence can come to tell their story to people with some legal knowledge and NGOs that help them to give advice on how to solve the situation or to get help, basically. And when we got into the room where she was sitting on a chair, on her hands, looking down all the time. It was her father that spoke for her. So he told us her story, that she had been on the way from school together with a friend, and a military jeep stopped by, and they asked the girls to go and buy them cigarettes. And they didn't dare to say no, so they went to buy cigarettes and came back. And that was when they actually took this girl on the jeep and disappeared with her. And she was away for, I think, a couple of days, maybe 3 days. And she was unable to tell exactly what had happened to her, but they had kept her in one of the houses where the soldiers were lodged. And of course, she was raped and hurt in different ways, but totally traumatized. And the father said that, this happens now and then. And it is, of course, a disgrace to the whole society that these things are being done to the girls, but we have learned to accept that it happens now and then, as much as we try to protest it. But this was just too much, because she was the most clever girl at school. She was the first girl that we could send to school. She was the best in her class, the best in her school. We all hoped that she would be able to continue and get a proper education and everything. We had put all our hopes for the family in this girl, and now she cannot do anything. And she felt so much ashamed, took it on herself, as was very often the case, that the blame fell on the victim, not on the perpetrators. And she felt that her life was over. So we tried to talk to the girl, and she refused to even lift her head, and she just looked down. Until the moment when we said, this is not your fault. This is not at all your fault. It's the perpetrators that must be put to justice, that must be held accountable. And you are not to feel ashamed, but you still have a future, and you have to find your friends here, you have to get treatment, and you have to, and we will do everything we can to help you, and also make sure that there is an end to impunity for these types of crimes. If we had not met that girl, if we had not seen her, and understood that finally at the end of this conversation she actually lifted her head and she looked at us as if she wanted to hear once more, it is not your fault. This is not your fault. There is something wrong in the whole system here that we have to fight, and you must help us to fight by telling your story, but we will also make sure you get the help you need. And I think that was one of the most important moments during these 2 years, when she actually lifted her head and looked at us. It means something when you meet another person. So never underestimate that. It wouldn't have been enough to send an email to her. I really think that we have to reconsider, because we live, and this is the theme of today's talk. We live in worrisome times and a confusing and frustrating world. And the way to deal with that is, of course, to come together, to find strength in working with other people and with the good people that we need to mobilize to change things as they are, and the threats that we see. The way is to talk to each other, to make sure that we can mobilize all the good in people around the world, and also show solidarity and work with them. I was thinking that on the 8th of March, I ought to start in a sort of solemn way by giving you the text of one of the most famous lyrics that I think captures what day this is. And you might have heard it. It's called Bread and Roses. It has been recorded by famous singers over the years. But this was how it started. And the women said, "As we come marching, marching in the beauty of the day, 1,000,000 darkened kitchens, 1,000 mill lofts grey, are touched with all the radiance that a sudden sun discloses. For the people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses. As we go marching, marching, we battle too for men, for they are women's children, and we mother them again. Our lives shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies. Give us bread, but give us roses. As we go marching, marching, unnumbered women dead, go crying through our singing their ancient call for bread. Small art and love and beauty, their drudging spirits new. Yes, it is bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. As we go marching, marching, we bring our greater days. The rising of the women means the rising of the race. No more the drudge and idler, 10 that toil where one reposes, but a sharing of life's glories, bread and roses, bread and roses." Den är fin tycker jag. It's nice. So I would like to start with talking about a feminist foreign policy. What on earth does that mean? This is a feminist government that I am representing, meaning also that we have 12 male ministers and 12 female ministers, and that's a principle as well as a smart thing to do. But I also announced when I took on this post that we would pursue a feminist foreign policy. It means that we recognize the role of women in also ensuring peace and security. But unfortunately, less than 4% of all the peace agreements that have been signed recently are signed by women as signatories, or actually has any chapters that look at the conditions for women, or takes up the role of women. And it means that in ensuring that there is a sustainable peace, you simply ignore half of the population. If you don't let them in, if you don't take in their experiences and their knowledge and their view of the world, it doesn't mean that women are better than men. But they are different. They carry different, they are also very like men, but they are also different. They bring different stories and experiences and knowledge. And they also represent an untapped potential of half of the population if you don't bring them in. So it's also a matter of democracy, but it is a smart thing to do. And we know from research that peace agreements that bring women on board, also as mediators or negotiators, will give you more options on the table and will last longer. Because women are also those in their societies that make sure that everybody knows about it. They teach young men and boys about what peace is and could be. And they, of course, play a very important economic role in their societies. So that's why it is also smart to ask the question, where are the women? This is what we do in the Security Council now, to make sure that they are there around the table where peace deals are being made, that they are also among the peacekeepers, represented as peacekeepers, that they are the ones whose needs and conditions are being represented in the texts of council resolutions or presidential statements or press statements or what have you, the decisions of the Security Council. Simply that they are that we take care also of their issues and their wishes and their ideas. And it's not a given. It is still not a given. Although, as you know, the Canadian Prime Minister, when asked why he had appointed so many women, said, because it's 2017. It's as obvious as that. Why would we not be half in the government, men and women? So, of course, this is important. And we have tried to pursue a feminist foreign policy by being guided by 3 R's. The first one really is the reality check. And we asked all our embassies to report back to us. What is the status of women? What about their rights? And we mean that human rights are also women's rights. And we have to make sure that they enjoy the same legal rights as men in every country. What about their representation? Are they there at the table? And thirdly, also resources. So, for example, Swedish Development Agency, when they distribute money, do we make sure that these resources also are directed towards women and women's needs? And I must say the response has been enormous. And in many countries, the embassies reported back to us that when we put on the gender lenses, we start to find the effects of, for example, having so many child marriages. If a majority of the girls are married even before they are, in some countries before they are 15, and definitely before they are 18, how on earth, they don't get any education, but instead they have many children also as being children themselves. How does that hamper the economic development or the possibility of bringing a country out of poverty? Well, of course, enormously. And how do you do in fighting that phenomenon around the world? So we are happy, and we think that it is also an effective foreign policy for peace and security if we also bring women on board. And we have given special attention also to the fact that sexual violence is used as a weapon or a strategy in wars and conflicts around the world still, and that impunity is the rule rather than the exception also in many of the ongoing conflicts. But security, as you then understand, will be, if we talk about security policy, it will be defined in so many different ways. In a country like the DRC, or in many African countries, it is actually to be able to go to bed and maybe hug a teddy bear instead of a gun, or being recruited as a child soldier, to know that you can wake up and have a first meal of the day, or to be able to go to school and feel safe and protected. While in our country, when we think about security, we probably think of military security. We see that we have a very different security situation around the Baltic Sea, and we can see that today there are real sort of military threats to countries close to us, and that our neighbor Russia has actually illegally annexed part of another country, as it did in Crimea. And of course appear also aggressive and act aggressively in eastern Ukraine. So we feel that there is a very, very different security situation around us. But we also understand that a threat to our security comes from climate change. When we see more of these extreme weather conditions that we've started to experience lately, there will be a lack of drinking water. There will be a lack of food, as we have a situation of starvation in several African countries at the moment as we speak and as we meet. And that will also then drive people out of their countries or exactly where they live. As we saw also in Syria, 4 years before there was an uprising, there was also a drought that made people flee and leave their countries. And that will, in many cases, also lead to conflict or the risk of conflict and war. And how do we deal with that? This is also the challenge for the Security Council. What exactly should they look out for in the field and report back to the Security Council for us to be able to track this development early on and do something about it? And you can see now that in the US, apparently, they are willing to take decisions to invest in more oil or drill for more oil also in the Arctic, which is totally counterproductive if we also want to fight climate change or mitigate or adapt to climate change. We cannot do those things. And I was recently in a meeting in Tromsø, where the Arctic Council regularly meets as well. And the reports from the Arctic region that we are a part of, and one of the Arctic countries, is a devastating one. 25 degrees warmer than recent years in November. The ice cap is melting, and it means that it's like taking off your cap when the sun is shining brighter and brighter on your head. And this means also that the fishermen have not stopped fishing seal or seal cubs because it is prohibited, but because there are no. And what they see instead are thousands and thousands of dead seals floating around. And to that, also all the plastic that we have put into our seas and oceans that ends up also in our bodies and in our bloodstreams. So this is to lift you up. We have to realize that these are some of the challenges. I think we also have to see that climate change offers the most amazing opportunities for humanity, for new production of electricity, finding new sources of energy that are environmentally friendly or human friendly even, and will bring new jobs and a possibility for economic development that is a sustainable one. And that's what we ought to talk even more about, I think. And probably that's also how we will have to argue with a new American administration. Much more about transaction, although we should not abandon our value base as we have in Europe and in the European Union, but we will also have to present it as a way to make America great again, if that is the ambition. It will not be by protectionism or populism. It will be with free trade and the way we open our societies and invest in things that are sustainable. But of course, some of these decisions that have been made in the US so far make us really concerned and worried. And it is yet to be seen exactly where this will go. There are democratic forces and the balancing sort of powers in the US that will help, I think, to correct some of the most worrying tendencies that we saw expressed in tweets from the president, but still not knowing exactly where this will go. And you can clearly see also on the 8th of March, we should recognize that these men that are now the most powerful in this world, that are leaders of their big countries, that play a role on the global scene, one thing they seem to have in common, and that's that they want to attack women or control women in one way or the other. Very often they start by introducing legislation, for example in the US with the gag rule, making sure that women cannot have access to abortion or sexual and reproductive health, and that is true also in other countries or that they don't actively fight against violence against women. And that's an interesting and scary tendency and phenomenon, that we can only make sure that we organize ourselves to fight, to look at clearly, describe and fight, and continue to fight for women's rights as well. And I have now totally abandoned my script, but this was, of course, part of it. All of this happens at the point, the security situation in our neighborhood, with a Russia that is much more aggressive, a change of leadership in the US that also make us at least uncertain about exactly where this is going, with more of a protectionist agenda. And at the same time, we have our own internal problems in the European Union with Brexit, and also some countries that seem to abandon what is exactly the foundation for our cooperation, and that is the values that we stand for, the respect for human rights, respect for democracy, and fighting also for those things, not only the economic and social decisions that we make, but also make sure that we are the ones who represent respect for human rights and democracy in the world, and fight actively for it. So this is now pushed back. There is globally a pushback for defending human rights and work for democracy. And that's another phenomenon that we have to that we have to observe, and that we have to counter. And as you know, a result of all of this, and including climate change, is that we've never seen so many refugees, so many people on the run since the end of Second World War. And if we would take together all the people that now depend on humanitarian assistance, it would make up the 11th biggest country in the world. So taken together, it would be the 11th biggest country on this planet. And all of those people also need help much longer. You think of humanitarian assistance means something that is acute, and soon you will be able to get out of that acute situation and find a way to get your living. But instead, on average, people who get humanitarian assistance will get it on a period between 9 and 17 years. So it means a whole upbringing of a child, for example. So it means also that this is a pressure on the whole system, on our economic and other systems in the world. I think that we also saw it in Europe, where I remember attending one Foreign Affairs Council meeting, where it was said that, well, among you present here, some of you have bought all the barbed wire, and others have bought all the blankets. And luckily, Sweden belonged to those that bought blankets. But we have to share the responsibility. Otherwise, this will not work. We have to help each other to respect the right to asylum. We have to show solidarity and humanity in a system that also divides the responsibility between countries. Because otherwise we will not be able to also to defend our own sort of social systems that we have built up, and that attracts people, that make them want to come here. The fact that you have a right to go to school, or that that we will look after also those that come as unaccompanied children or youngsters. So this is really the challenge for politicians of today. Är det här mitt vatten? Ja. Okay. I was thinking that maybe we would take more questions, and I will finish by saying that we we also have, of course, the threat from terrorism, which is another element that clearly is a threat to our security situation. And remember that if we fear terrorist attacks in Europe, it is the poorest regions and countries in the world that are also the hardest hit by terrorism. So in the same year we had Ankara, Baghdad, Beirut, Sinai, northern Nigeria, Bamako in Mali and other places hit by terrorist attacks, with many people dead and wounded and hurt and traumatized. And now we have the Security Council resolution that give member states a right to fight ISIL or Daesh, as we use most of the time. And remember also, in the longer run, the fight against terrorism is not primarily with military means. You cannot fight it down with military means only. You have to make sure that you build existing countries that provide also a hope for the future and possibilities for young people. We've never been so many, or you have never been so many young people in the world as today. And when they don't see that they are respected, that they don't have a voice, they don't have any education or possibility to get a job, this becomes an option. They are paid $300 and given a weapon instead to fight for something that they might not even know exactly what it is. But it is something. It gives a meaning. And I think you have to build the rule of law in those countries. You have to stabilize regions like the Middle East and North Africa in order to avoid that we constantly live with the threat of terrorism. And you have to make inclusive societies. And maybe less of a focus on identity and religion and more of looking at people as humans and what we have in common. And that's also why foreign policy is the first front line, also in making sure that we can live in societies that are peaceful and secure. And I think today when we discuss so much about, I saw also the other day an article about Europe now needing to invest in nuclear weapons. No, we don't need more nuclear weapons, we need less. It will not make us safer. Not in any way, and we know that from history. Couldn't we learn those lessons? But there have to be other voices who rise up and say, well, the most effective is to look at the real problems in this world and fight those, not to just invest in more weapons. So I think we have to realize that there is also a way that includes diplomacy, foreign policy, help to development, and help to get young people, give young people the role that they deserve, a central role in the world and hope for the future. This is how we can get from despair to hope. That's what I am working for. So thank you for listening so long, and I am willing to answer to any questions. Thank you.
So if you have any questions, just raise your hand and we will just hand out the microphones. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for a wonderful presentation, Mrs. Wallström. You spoke a little bit about the anti-abortion movement in the United States, and I'm wondering about the recent decriminalization act that passed in Russia, which mainly affects women and children and legalizes the violence against them. What can we do as Swedes and as Europeans to oppose this? Because it's very much so an equality issue.
No, this is very important, and I of course raised it also when I met with my counterpart, with the Foreign Minister Lavrov in Moscow. I must say that there was not much interest in discussing the matter, but the more when I met with civil society organizations, NGOs, later on at the Sakharov Center in Moscow, and it was a very dark picture that they painted. Because not only do they work every day with, I think she said 20,000 telephone calls from women who emergency calls from women, but now they are also labeled foreign agents. And as we know, even the Nordic Council of Ministers is now a foreign agent in Russia, and it means that people hesitate to contact them because it purposely this means that they will seem like something that you don't want to be in touch with, and to discourage people from getting in contact with them. So it's important to describe it and to continue to debate it, and also to put pressure on them, but also offer advice, of course. We can invite them to come and see how not that we are perfect, not at all, but we can invite them to look at how do we train police and those who work in the health sector in identifying these type of incidents. So we should continue to protest and say what we think about it.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm Eddie Holmgren, I'm a retired physician, and I'm a deputy chairman of the NGO Hope for Action. And my wife and me will go to Goma in Eastern Congo in 3 weeks to follow up one of these projects supported by SIDA and Forum Syd. And we've been there before, and it's very hopeful to see. We recognize the girls and the women you spoke about so emotionally, but there is quite a lot of hope, because they have had 1,500 women in this cooperative for agriculture, and many of these are raped, but also in other ways traumatized by the internal migration due to the conflict. And my question about this is that I'm a bit ashamed that I had to go to Congo and learn from very decent men, that should be said too, that you, Mr. Reddy, you know about Security Council Resolution 1325. No, I'm afraid I do not know. But that is, as you talked about, you didn't say the figure, but that women are allowed to take part in the rebuilding in a post-conflict period. But my question is, there are big problems in Rwanda, Burundi, Eastern Congo, still a war zone, and we have the largest UN mission ever for many, many years. To make a long story short, they haven't perhaps done very much about the situation. But what is our, Sweden's and the Security Council's possibility to make something good out of this very big mission with 20,000 people, and I think 1,000 is civil servants? Could you comment on this situation in Central Africa?
Yeah, I think what is necessary is security sector reform. They need to, of course, train their military, because very often, unfortunately, it's the national security forces that are also responsible for many of these rapes. So they need to train their own soldiers. They need to have a military doctrine that should explain that this is as bad as deserting. You know, this is really not that I pledge for the death penalty, but it should be seen as regarded as bad as deserting to rape women, that it is a no-go. And this is also what every officer should know, that never under my watch. And of course, then we need to make sure that the whole system is such that there isn't impunity, because that has also been the rule. Now, in the DRC, they have made changes, and it is moving, as you're saying. We can find some positive things. And we even, me and my team, we even helped to pick up one of these guys that was responsible for mass rapes in Walikale. And that was important. I think they have to show that there is a new story about the DRC and that they are really taking care of this. And then it has become endemic in society. If this is okay, if those that have a uniform and an arm by the state to protect you, if they rape women as they want around in society, of course this spills over into a situation where most men think that that's okay. And I think that this is where these projects will change the attitude, will also change the behavior. And MONUSCO will have to help. And even if they are the biggest mission we have, the country is so vast, and very often they come, they rotate. So I met myself with soldiers that come from India or Bangladesh, and they are put out there in the jungle in the DRC. They know no language, no local language. They have no contact with the local population, and they cannot interpret the signs that they see. The early warning signals they don't see because they know too little about the situation. So this is also a challenge to the UN in bringing so many soldiers there. But with the right leadership, with security sector reform, with an end to impunity, it is possible to change the things.
Does Sweden have no-go zones?
No, we don't have any no-go zones, even though it is portrayed that way. There are no areas where police can't go, or where it might be difficult and difficulties, but there are no-go zones.
What about Husby? A couple of weeks ago, the police were forced to use their weapons to disperse a crowd of angry rioters.
But that's what they have to do. If necessary, the police will have to use all their means to make sure that they establish a presence. But there are no-go zones. There should not be. But the police will have to do their job.
Okay, thank you for answering the question.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm wondering, in the discussions that are coming now about having new rules for exporting weapons, I wonder if you are going to press for a harder law that will make it impossible to export weapons to countries that doesn't respect human rights. Yeah.
The first thing we did as a government was to make sure that we had a commission looking into how we can introduce also a democracy criteria into the existing very strict legislation that we have. But we wanted also to make sure that there was a democracy criterion. So the commission worked, and they looked at all the legal possibilities and exactly what you have to do to change the laws. And it has then been on, vad heter det när man skickar ut det på remiss? I don't know. It has been sent around to all organizations and parties and interested and actors. So they have given their views on this, and it is now at the Department of Justice, so they are writing the proposal. So it will come this spring, and very soon, I think, to the Parliament. So a new bill will be presented where this is made another criterion, and that is one of democracy.
Hi, my name is Sarah Edvardsson Närnborg. I'm coming from the movement Vi står inte ut. And I have a question to you about the children, the unaccompanied minors and youngsters. You talked about traumatized children all over the world. But we see a crisis in Sweden. They are traumatized even here. So what shall we do? What thoughts do you have about this situation? What can you give us to bring hope to these desperate 30,000 headed youngsters?
You don't know.
Please help us.
Yeah. No, I have seen your calls, and I read your calls for help and for attention to this issue. Absolutely, and I get letters also every day. And the situation in the background is, of course, that no other country, no other OECD country has ever received so many unaccompanied children as Sweden did. Even among those countries that received the most, like Germany, the proportion of unaccompanied children was enormously high. So it meant, of course, a strain on all our systems, like the number of schools we have to build, like looking after not only their sort of immediate needs, but also looking at the longer perspective, because if they come as children, you have to think about their future and the whole. So our systems have really been put to a test. And I think this is also what we see, because we don't have a free flow of migrants into the country, so we have to test their reasons for asylum. And that is, of course, where today, unfortunately, the resources are not such that it can happen quickly enough. And this is something we discuss almost every week at the government meetings. What else can we do to help with resources, both for the migration authorities to do it quicker, and also make sure that we can have a reception, for example, in Afghanistan, that can help these young people. So that's the challenge that they are working at locally, but also the government, to make sure that the resources are there and that the migration authorities also can work faster to treat the asylum. But most from Syria, I would say almost all of them have had a chance to stay. But we also have many young coming from Afghanistan and other countries where it is not a given that they have a right to asylum. And that's the challenge.
We got one question left there.
Yeah, thank you very much for this lecture. And I wanted to hear about your reaction on Hungary voting now to detain all asylum seekers in container camps, and also what Sweden's response will be, and also at the EU level, because as you certainly know, a lot of human rights groups and UN has been very critical, and I'm very worried about this. So I wanted to hear what. Yeah.
I didn't hear your first.
It's about Hungary now deciding to
yes.
vote to detain all asylum seekers in container camps.
No,
which
this
is
is totally
worrying.
This is not only illegal; it's inhuman, and of course we are trying to correct also the Hungarians and get them to accept that we are in this together, and we have to find solutions that are common in the European Union, and also with the engaged UN bodies and those that know these issues. And of course, one way has been to say that it ought to be through the UNHCR, the refugee body that can also make proportionate how these refugees can be taken care of by the EU countries. So we of course are totally against having solutions of this kind. I fear it, and I don't like what I hear and see.
All right, that was all we had time for, unfortunately. We would like to thank you for coming here and holding such an interesting lecture. And we hope you come back someday as well.
Can I say one last thing? Just one last sentence, because I also heard so many wise things about what to do on the 8th of March and from now on. And especially all the advice giving to young women, but I think it should also be young men. Because we live together, we have to live together. We have to find a way forward where we are happy, both women and men, and respected fully for who we are. There was one advice missing, the one that I have at least tried to give my sons. I won't get them involved into this, they might protest, but one thing I've said is also do something unselfish. In those days of selfies and looking into yourself and looking after yourself, everything from how you look inside and outside, do something unselfish for somebody else. And you will find that maybe you will learn the most also about yourself from actually doing that. I think that must be an advice to all of us, to try to take an interest in somebody's self. somebody other than ourselves. Do something unselfish. Engage in a project, find somebody that you can help, and your life will be much richer. That's my experience, being old now. Thank you for listening and for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you.